material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, work in process, finished goods, cost of goods manufactured, as well as cost of goods sold, which we've covered. So we'll start here. Okay, so this shows you that direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead can be applied to the individual jobs. So direct material and direct labor are applied to the individual jobs as they occur, and then the manufacturing overhead jobs, or the manufacturing overhead, is applied at the end of the period, as shown here. Okay, so So obviously you know now how to estimate the predetermined overhead rate. That's the POHR that you see right here. And it is always divided by the cost driver, which you will always be provided. It's typically direct labor or manufacturing overhead. So you'll take the total estimated manufacturing costs, those will also be given to you, and divide that by your cost driver, whatever your cost driver is that they tell you. That includes both the fixed and the variable portions of the estimated overhead. I'll show you a couple of things that you can do with your predetermined overhead rate. Keep in mind that a lot of times I'll abbreviate this into the POHR, but it means predetermined overhead rate. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, we can determine what a unit cost is. What's a unit cost? I have a product, I manufacture it. How much does that product really cost me? Well, that's a good question. And then once I know what that unit cost is, then I can figure out what the total cost is. So let's take a look. I think the best way to do this is to look at an example. So here I've got job 615 at this manufacturing place, and I've got $200 of direct materials that are going to go into making this piece part, whatever it is. 10 direct labor hours. We pay our labor $15 an hour. That's about minimum wage. And here's a kick here, is that I am only going to give you the total overhead cost for the year, but I'll also give you the cost driver. So if you remember from the previous slide that you will be given the cost driver, you won't have to decide for yourself. Here we just told you the cost driver is direct labor hours. What the heck does that mean? That means that to put this product together, the majority of the cost really comes from our direct labor. If we're a highly automated process, then chances are it wouldn't come from direct labor. I think you can kind of see the difference there. Okay, so what are the total costs of this job? Well, we for sure know that we've got $200 in direct labor hour. Looks like we've probably got $150 in direct labor, right? 10 times the 15. So what the heck is the manufacturing overhead rate? So if you think back to your previous slide, you might even be able to get this one. So what we talked about before was the predetermined overhead rate, and we have to calculate that. So the total manufacturing overhead for the whole year was $760,000. And we approximated, which is the best we can do at the beginning of the year since we don't know our actuals, is going to be 200,000 hours, or 20,000 hours, excuse me. So if you take 760 divided by 20,000, you're going to come up with $38. Is that what we need to add? No, we don't, because this estimated overhead is based on direct labor hours. So said another way, for every direct labor hour that I work, I'm going to slap on $38, and that is going to represent the manufacturing overhead. Why do we do this? Because we don't, like, manufacturing overhead is kind of a gray area. It's not, you know, it's like the lights in the building. Like, how do we tell which kilowatt went to go to use which, you know, light up which factory assembly line or which product? So it's kind of a vague overview. So we just take, okay, well, I know what my total electricity bill is. In this case, it was, you know, $760,000. I know that I work direct labor hours of 20,000 approximately. That's what I think. So it's going to be $38 an hour. So every time I build a product and I use a direct labor hour, I'm going to put $38 on top of there. So bam. Now, you know, so there's my $38, and I worked 10 direct labor hours. So 38 times 10 is 380. So there's my total cost. Okay. That is pretty straightforward. So I always use my direct materials because it's direct. I know exactly what I put, you know, what I paid to, you know, put all the raw materials together, and I know exactly what my direct labor was. Remember, my direct labor are those people that are specifically working on that product. Okay.
would be one of the processes that we use. And then the assembly, so milling might be like, shaving the wood down or, whatever. So then we've got an assembly department. So we're going to put things together. So to me, a milling process sounds more like a machine is going to do that. So the machine hours, or the amount that I spend on that machine or whatever, that's going to be the driving factor behind that part of the production process. However, if you think about it, the assembly of it maybe could be more manual. So we might base the manufacturing overhead, or what takes up or what eats up the cost, based on our direct labor hours. Okay, so another kind of piece of information that I'm going to give you, which kind of helps us with this whole cost and price thing of like, why do I care what my costs are? Well, because it kind of sets the price sometimes to make sure we're getting the right margin. So in this example, this is just an example, this particular company sets a cost plus model. So whatever the cost of their bike is, or their skateboard or whatever that they're making, they're going to mark it up to 75% of that cost. Okay, this is just an example. So at the beginning of the year, the company has made the following estimates. They think that the milling they're going to use about 60,000 hours. Their assembly is going to be about 3,000 hours. Here they've got direct labor on both of these. And something kind of interesting, do you see that the machine hours takes up the bulk of the time in the milling, and in the assembly, the bulk of the time is in labor? Pretty interesting. Then I've been given the total fixed part. So this is the fixed part, and then I've been given a variable part. So let's see what we're going to do with this. So I copied the information down here for you so we wouldn't have to memorize this. So the milling department has total fixed overhead of $390,000. So that's where I got that. Plus $2 an hour in variable costs. And because the milling department is going to be based on the machine hours, we're going to take that $2 times 60,000 machine hours. There's my 60,000. And we come up with $510,000. So this is step one. I'm just getting the total predetermined overhead rate. Okay, in the assembly department, well, I've got the 500,000. Where did I get that? That's my fixed manufacturing overhead, plus $3.75, which is the variable portion, times the direct labor hours. Notice I'm using machine hours on the milling, direct labor hours on the assembly. Boom, 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 and there's my 80,000. Okay, great. So now I've got that. Now I've got to get my predetermined overhead rate. Remember, in like 3 or 4 slides ago, we take the total manufacturing overhead. That's what we have down here. I copied this from the previous slide. That's my total manufacturing overhead, and I divide that by the cost driver. In this case, it's the machine hours for the milling department, and I come up with $8.50 per machine hour. For every machine hour, $8.50 is going on there. Now, for my assembly department, a little bit different. Now I've got $800,000 divided by the direct labor hours, which are 80,000, and that gives me $10 per direct labor hour. So through the assembly department, every time I work 1 direct labor hour, $10 in manufacturing overhead gets added. So let's take a look and see how this is going to pan out. So now I've got one specific job. This one specific job takes 90 machine hours. It takes 20 direct labor hours. Notice I'm kind of ignoring a couple things because that's not the cost driver, but we're going to get to that in a minute. So here's my direct labor costs, my direct material, my direct labor costs for each of these. All right. So now you ready to add these up? Now what we've got is, for this particular job, okay, so for this particular job, we had direct materials of $800. That's what it told us down here. We had direct labor of $70. That's the piece of cake. But how much manufacturing overhead do we apply? Well, remember, the milling department is based on machine hours. So I got to go back here. How many machine hours did I work? 90 machine hours. And what's the predetermined overhead rate? It is $8.50. So the 90 machine hours times the $8.50, which I got from the slide before. If you want to go back there, $8.50, okay, equals $765. Boom, that's where I get that. The assembly, look at this. Here's my direct materials. There's my direct labor. Manufacturing overhead applied is, remember I had 20 direct labor hours at $10 an hour. Where did I get that 10? That 10 was over here, okay, equals $200. Or equals $200. So then I just add it all up, and here's the total cost of my job as it went through the milling department and the assembly department. Do you see how this is much more detailed and much more specified? Now for the last step, remember we were going to create a $75 markup. So if I take the total cost, which were on the slide before, and I mark it up by 75%, the total selling price of my job would be the combination of both of those. So what does this all mean? If we had used a single plant-wide overhead rate, which is what we learned to begin with, where we were either using direct labor hours or machine hours, we would have come up with a different cost. And so if we have a little more detail, what I wrote down here is sometimes, now more is not always better, but in a case like this, more detail is probably going to result in more accurate costing, and in this case, because of the way they mark up, more accurate prices. So it's a more accurate margin for us. And the outcome is that this could, without the C, enhance management planning and decision making, which is really important in cases like this. So that is the end of chapter 2.